same cemetery, but from the other side. So the light more behind me and more shining on the wreaths and the crosses. And so the colors come out even more vividly. The downside with this shot is that you get a bit more of, the background is much more uninteresting, and you can see, if you look closely, then there's some tin corrugated huts there. So perhaps what I should have done is get down even lower and have the crosses and the wreaths set off against the blue sky, and that might be the thing. So there'll be a number of occasions where I say, well, actually just gonna have to go back and see this again. Graves, so we visited about half a dozen of these cemeteries over our time in the Altiplano and then the Atacama Desert. And they were clear, each one was different from the next one. Here we visited this cemetery at sunset, and the softer light at sunset, I think, suits the more muted colors in the flowers that we're seeing around the crosses here. This is one of the first cemeteries that we visited. And I think that, although the colors aren't as vivid as we've seen before, I think it's just extraordinary how you get the sense that the cemetery just peters out. There's no boundary between the cemetery and the background terrain. It all just runs out, and it's just so incredibly arid there. At this cemetery, I was also able to get in close, and I thought that this square format for the picture actually suited the round wreath, with then the structure visible through the center of the wreath. And I just like the colors and the textures in the flowers. And it wasn't just the cemeteries that we found to be extraordinary. Often the accompanying churches were just as dramatic. And so here, I love how the blue of the sky matches the blue of the cross and the doors, and how, they're all set off against the whitewashed adobe walls in there, and just how Spartan it all is. Okay. I don't think that was a question, but if there are questions, do please jump in. Here, the architecture is very different and just as dramatic. As I was putting this together, Janet pointed out to me that I've used the same composition techniques of the last two slides. So the church in the background, and then here there's a well or a smaller building or something set off and to the left. Janet also pointed out that I should have taken another step or two to the right and got separation between the two buildings there. So it's been interesting to go back through these pictures with a slightly more critical eye at this point. Different again here. Church set to the background and a bell tower, and you can see that there's a door to the bell tower, and you are able to go up and ascend the stairs inside and look out. You're able to go up, provided that you're not a woman, that is, as apparently it's unlucky for women to go up the bell tower. You can also just see glimpses in the background of the corrugated iron roofs in the shacks. And so this is just, a tiny little village, or a hamlet really, just stuck up high in the high plains of the Andes. And a lot of you will know that I love taking pictures of walls and doors. And so there were just so many opportunities for me here. So I love, on the left-hand side, the blue and the red just set off against the rather, distressed whitewash of the walls. And then on the right, we have a door made out of cactus wood. I never knew. And if you look closely, I've just realized that the hinges on the right-hand side of the door are wooden and look like they're falling apart too. So clearly we never saw the door open, and I'm not sure that it would, but just love, you know, the texture of the wood contrasting against the texture of the door. So it is tempting to do more of those, but A, would be here all day. And there's a lot more to see. We've only just covered really a couple of 100 kilometers in the very north of Chile. So one small part of one country that we visited in the trip. And I wanted to do it slightly broader than that. And so what I have done then is split the rest of the pictures into various groups or themes that I think more or less hang together. And so rather than, not do it chronologically or geographically, so we're going to jump around from place to place and time to time, and hopefully it'll all hang together somehow. So first section that I wanted to do, or after this, I wanted to go into, it's not just death that was colourful, but we found life in the Americas to be generally colourful, although as per the chap in this picture here, not always at 100 miles an hour. Here we were out on a boat trip or a ferry trip to Isla Janitzio, which is an island in a lake in central Mexico. And the ferry went past these local fishermen, giving me the opportunity to take this picture. The ferry stopped and the fishermen came up for tips. So I think part of it is a bit of a setup for tourists. And then when we got to the island, we found this wonderful woman with a very simple stove and setup, cooking the fish that had just been caught that day. And so unsurprisingly, that was our lunch for the day then sorted. San Juan is one of the small towns that surrounds Lake Atitlan, which is a big lake in the middle of Guatemala. And again, we sort of took a ferry across on a trip around some of the towns that ring the lake. San Juan was the first of the ones that we visited. And here we found mother and daughter spinning wool and doing some hand weaving with a hand loom, making some of the fabrics and the beautiful colors that just, you know, always associate with Guatemala. I'd say it's probably put on for tourists, but they did look very happy to see us, and I liked the way that they were, you know, working together and happy at their work. Most of the locals, though, had much better things to do than worry about tourists. And so in this case, this chap, very interested in his paper, and he's clearly the tomato specialist in town. Even better, he wore a nice blue shirt to set off against the red of the tomatoes and the other red colors that dominate in this picture. So I quite like how that all got put together for me. And there's quite a lot that we just stumbled across as we were walking around. So that, you know, the two previous pictures we came across, these two in particular, we were just walking about town and came across these scenes. So on the left-hand side, you know, in Tacna, Peru, there was a wedding happening. You can just about make out the bride in white in the background, but I was much more interested in the other women who were clearly in their traditional dress and were just dancing in the street. And I like how I've managed to get the woman's body and face sharp, but have the movements in the dress. And so it's one of those where, yeah, that worked out quite well in the shutter speed that I managed to choose. In Oaxaca in Mexico, then this little girl was in a world of her own, just dancing down the street. And I managed to get this shot. I just like, the expression on her face, as well as the colors in her dress, being particularly set against the duller stone walls. Here are a couple of shots from two different towns in Guatemala. On the left, it was market day in Solola. And it wasn't just this chap, but pretty much all of the locals turned out in their traditional dress. And I was just astonished at, how the colors in his suit and how much time and effort must have gone into making his suit, as well as just how happy he was just to be sort of stood there watching the world go by. The woman on the right-hand side, then, well, she's definitely got a job to do. She's not quite sure why I'm taking a picture of her, I don't think. But again, I liked her pose, and I definitely liked the dress that she was. I'm definitely intrigued by, I think it's just a padding on her hat, and that the basket that's by her feet would have been carried on her head. And we'll see maybe some other photos later where they're carrying baskets on heads again. In this case, we were having dinner in a restaurant in Valparaiso in Chile, when this lot turned up outside and started making a bit of a racket. So we had to go out and take a picture. We're still not entirely sure what it was that they were celebrating or what the reason for the music was, but very happy that they turned out. And we'll see some more of the colors of Valparaiso a little bit later. So the previous photos were all everyday life. We just happened to arrive somewhere, and that's what we saw. When you get to a place and they decide they're going to have a parade, then there's a whole new level of color explosion that happens. When we're traveling, we tend to book smaller hotels and avoid the big chains, and usually we're out of the city center. But this time in Morelia, we'd happened to book a hotel right on the main street, and we had a room on the second floor with a balcony that just overlooked and looked down into the street. We'd only just arrived in the hotel and into our rooms when this parade started up, and we had half an hour of processions in various traditional dresses and costumes. And I just like this one, one of the first shots that we took straight out of the hotel room. Yeah, there's a bit that's wrong with this photo. Not least, I don't think I've quite got the focus balance between the figures in the background and the chap in the foreground. So wouldn't be submitting this to any challenge, but you can't deny the color in the picture. This again is the same town. This is Morelia in Mexico. These guys were busking. It appears that it's a traditional costume and a traditional dance of some sort. And the dance seemed to consist of a lot of stamping of feet on there. You see they have flat wooden clogs on their shoes. So hence we call them the Stampy Dancy Men, as we didn't really understand what it was that they were doing. And then, of course, if you hit Independence Day, then all bets are off as to what you'll see, and particularly around the colors of things. We had been in Mexico for Independence Day in the past, so we knew when it was and what sort of things to expect. And so we kind of timed our trip so that we'd be in Guanajuato, which has a reputation for celebrating Independence Day well. And actually we found out as part of our history that it was one of the first towns to be liberated as part of the independence movement in Mexico. So Independence Day in Guanajuato is a big thing. The main street got closed all morning, and there were 2 hours of parades through every single school, so far as we could see, got represented. A lot of the voluntary groups, the church groups, the police, the army, everybody paraded through town. And it was just sort of fascinating to spend the morning just watching all of these people trooping by. More unexpected was then arriving in this town of Tacna, which is the very southernmost town of Peru. And actually, we'd only really went to Tacna because we wanted to cross over the border and start our journey through Chile from the very northernmost point of Chile. So we had one full day in Tacna, and it just so happened that that day was the anniversary of the day that the town got returned to Peru after it was captured by Chile in the War of the Americas between Chile and Peru. And I think it's the war where Bolivia lost its coastline. So there's quite a lot of history around this. These couple of photos, then I like them. I like the parade down the right-hand side, and just there's the line of Peruvian flags giving that bright red streak down the middle of the photo. And then on the left-hand side, what I wanted to do, and I think what I've succeeded in doing, was in capturing the marching men in mid-stride, and then framed between the two sets of standing soldiers. So quite pleased that I actually managed to get the composition that I wanted to achieve there. I couldn't talk about colourful life in the Americas without mentioning and showing a couple of pictures from our trip to the Lucha Libre, Mexican wrestling. As a boy growing up in the UK, then I remember on the ITV World of Sport used to have wrestling every Saturday lunchtime. Well, it was nothing like this, not least because my memories of the World of Sport wrestling were all in black and white. I guess now you have WWE wrestling in the US, and this looks very, very similar. Clearly choreographed moves, very well-defined goodies and baddies in the wrestling, but still, a lot of acrobatics and a lot of, bouncing around the ring and throwing each other around, and in their famous painted masks, which is one of the key things of the Lucha Libre, the painted masks and the skimpily clad girls announcing the arrival of the new wrestlers into the ring. And of course, markets and market days were a consistently great source of colours and photos for us. I just loved how everyone got loaded up into this truck, and we were never really quite sure as to whether they'd been to the markets and were now heading home, or whether they were just arriving in the market. But clearly it's a fully loaded truck, and as you look at the people in the truck, you see again, they're all in traditional dress. Here's the market that they were heading to. It's another reminder that these things are not put on for tourists. This is key part of local life. You'll see them the women are carrying baskets on their heads, and with markets, then there's always lots of color around, whether it's from a wide shot like this one, or from this next one, with the splashes of red and of green, or if you get into up close and focus on a single stall, you have to wonder whether she's specializing a bit too much in bananas, but it certainly qualifies for color. It's just a shame that it's not a sharp enough picture. And as Frank said earlier today, then street photography is hard and you need to practice at it, and I don't practice enough. Here, I was trying to be discreet with the camera, and rather than hold it up at eye level, I had it down at waist level, and I don't think that I was holding it sufficiently steadily, and there's a bit of sort of camera shake as I took the picture here, which spoiled what's really quite a nice picture, I thought. So you can have, you know, the wide shots of the market, the individual vendors, all get right in close on one of the individual stalls. I'm not convinced that these fruit are apricot, but certainly I love the color that was shown to me in the fruit as it's set up. The challenge with fruit like this is always that if there's only one color, yes, it's nice bright colors, but the eye tends to wander around the frame. And so here I've put the green of the leaf on the third line to give a bit of contrast in there and something to focus onto. And it's amazing what you find in some of these markets. As I said, here, chicken in a basket. And you really got to feel sorry for the chickens being forced to poke their heads, if they're lucky, through the netting in there. And you can see on the left-hand side of the picture, there's a chicken that's tied to the basket with a string around its foot. So, you know, not great in terms of animal welfare. Sorry, wrong way. Here we go. And of course, where there's markets, there's often street food sellers. And I really like this photo of this woman with her sopapillas, which were pretty tasty, actually. The challenge with markets is often that they're very busy places. And so keeping the composition in tight and just being sure as to what it is you're trying to, getting over what it is you're trying to communicate here. So this picture, actually, I took in landscape format, and it's quite heavily cropped down, both on the left-hand side to get to remove another woman who was also helping on the stand, and then more particularly on the right-hand side for all the people who were lining up for this street food. And so here, what I wanted to do is just focusing on the woman selling the sopapillas in her blue dress, contrasted against the red of the stall that's there. You never quite know how people are going to react to having the camera pointed at them. And I just love how happy this chap is to show off his fish. Is absolutely delighted. I also like, you know, the look that his son is giving him, and it's definitely a dad, you're being embarrassing look, I'd say. Apparently, he spotted Janet lining up to take a picture and decided to show off his catch. Half an hour, right. Given it was about 7,500 kilometers between the northernmost and the southernmost points in our trip in Central and Southern America, then there's bound to have been a huge variety of the landscapes that we encountered. And I wanted to show a few of those, a few of the more typical and memorable scenes that we encountered. In Guatemala, you know, we visited the ruins of Tikal, but for me, I will always associate Guatemala with volcanoes. And so this is the view from the breakfast table at our hotel in Antigua de Guatemala. And yes, I think that is smoke coming out of the volcano in the background. In northern Chile, The coast is arid and sparsely populated. And with this picture, I like the invitation, I think, that is in it to sit down and just enjoy the view back out over the town and the harbour. And I like how there's nobody around to take up the offer and to soak in that view. As I said at the start, before the desert cemeteries, then we headed up and we spent some time in the high altiplano and the Atacama Desert. This is a picture that I think Janet submitted for last month's challenge, so you've seen this before. I just love how much of a story that this picture tells, certainly for me, and I think that it speaks volumes as to how badly Janet was feeling the effects of the altitude, that she couldn't get out of the car to go and explore this incredible landscape that we could see all around us. And yet she still managed to have the imagination to take this picture to tell that story for her. Whilst Janet was taking that picture, I was taking this one. A very typical landscape in this part of northern Chile. We're very close to the border with Bolivia here, and the car that we were in is tucked around the little hill on the left-hand side of the picture. I really like, the way, the muted tones and the dramatic background to it. I needed to do a bit better job of getting the bush on the left-hand side in focus, but nevertheless, I'm really happy with this picture. This is the same area this part of Chilean Parque Lauca in the Altiplano, different volcano and a different lake though, and perhaps a better blast of color from the swampy marshland in the foreground, and clearly with the snow on the volcano in the background there. There's only a couple of 100 kilometers between Parque Lauca in the Altiplano and the Atacama Desert, but the terrain changes completely as you go from one to the other. Much more arid, much less vegetation, and actually many more tourists in the Atacama. The Atacama is more famous. The town of San Pedro de Atacama is one of the world's backpacker hotspots, and it's the town that exists for backpackers. Of the two, I'm not sure which I preferred, just pretty happy to have seen both. And so here we have Piedras Rojas, so the red rocks, no prizes for how they got that name. And I just like how as you look down through, you have the rocks and then the salt lake in the background, and leading on to the mountains. And that incredible color of that mountain right in the middle of the shot. I think they tried to say it all with the title here, that it might be more touristy, but that's a relative term. It's still a big area with big terrain, high mountains, wide plains, and you feel quite small as you're walking around in there. There isn't much that's happening. Here, I've been struggling with the composition of this picture. I knew that I wanted a picture of the mountain reflecting in the lake, but it's just how to make it work as a shot. And then that flamingo walked into view for me, and I was pleased that I think he's in the right place. His reflection's clear, and I like the spacing between his two legs and his neck. That makes that nice symmetrical shape in there, and I think that's what makes this picture for me. Sometimes it's the flora that's what you need to make a picture And so two different shots of two different cactuses, cacti, whatever. On the left here, I like how it just sort of feels like it's reaching up high into the sky. And then on the right, we have the blast of color from the yellow flower set against the prickly green in the background. I suspect the picture on the right's a bit too busy, but nevertheless, I quite like the contrast between, in that picture and between the two pictures. With the terrain in itself, then it was often sort of quite monochrome in nature. And so here, what really helps this time was this is at sunset. And so we have the orange light of the setting sun, both casting as glorious tones on the landscape itself, and with the shadows then really emphasizing the craggy nature of that landscape, unsurprisingly called the Valley of the Moon. So as we sort of then headed south through Chile, went back to the coast and south a bit, and then headed back up into the mountains. And our next trip into the mountains was following the River Elqui up the Elqui Valley. And prior to this point, then it had all been pretty arid. We'd seen some sort of fairly dramatic scenery, but really very little vegetation and no cultivated vegetation. And so it was a bit of a shock driving up the Elqui Valley, and we see this blast of green that's following the river as it runs down between the mountains. The green is of vineyards, so they're vines. And the grapes are for pisco, which is a Chilean or Peruvian, depending on who you're talking to. It's their clear spirit. And so, of course, the pisco sours are the famous cocktail that's made with pisco. And very tasty they are too. We had to try some. And now we've jumped much further south, beyond Santiago and halfway down to Tierra del Fuego. So back up into the Andes. But here in Patagonia, the nature and the character of the mountain changes yet again. And the whole feel of this place is much more alpine in nature, and the architecture of the buildings changes completely. This is quite a posh hotel that's close to this town of Bariloche in Argentina. So quite swish, but I just like how it was just set on top of a hill against the mountain backdrop. So this is the last of the landscape shots to show you. And again, we're back in Guatemala, hence the volcanoes. We'd set the alarm early, and we wanted to get up into some sunrise photography on the lakefront. And so this shot's a reminder that you're not always going to get the beautiful oranges and pinks, even if you have set the alarm appropriately early. Here, though, what saved us was the blue hour. And I just like how the blue tones are just all through the picture here. So, and the way that the jetties point to the volcano in the background. 40 minutes in, we're good. So color in the Americas. I've really got to talk about some of the transport that we saw and that we traveled on. Most of the time we were traveling in buses or coaches. It's the easiest way to get around from town to town. Fortunately, generally not in buses like this one. Generally, the coaches in both Central and Southern America, very modern and very comfortable, and they ran to time. But modern and comfortable are not the words that you'd use to describe the chicken buses in Guatemala. Here, the attraction is not the modernity, but just the blast of color that you get with them. They are, of course, old US yellow school buses that have reached their end of service life. And so goodness knows how many miles they will have done. They're brought down to Guatemala and given a unique paint job. And the effort that's gone into some of the paint jobs, I think, is absolutely incredible. They were all unique and all in, or often, they were very well looked after, and clearly time had been spent cleaning and polishing them, at least on the outside. Inside's a different story. Pretty much nothing gets done on the inside except perhaps the installation of a big sound system for a boombox. And so the seats are the original yellow school bus, seating for US school children. And so it's no surprise that not only I couldn't fit properly, but even adult Guatemalans looked pretty packed in. And these buses are used for both short distance and long distance journeys. And we had a 30-minute trip, and that was enough for us. So a long distance journey really doesn't bear thinking about. We only took one train journey on our travels because trains are not really a thing in the Americas. So it's easy for this to be our favorite train, but I think it's pretty fabulous. We needed to cross from the southernmost town in Peru, from Tacna, to the northernmost town in Chile. Most people would take a taxi to do this trip. But we found that this train runs twice a day, and we were able to get tickets on the one that we wanted. As well as the sort of general quirkiness of the train and the surroundings, then we loved it because there's a railway museum here in this station in Tacna. And as I was buying the tickets, then we had to fill in the form. And I learned that in Spanish, my profession is now jubilado. So new Spanish word for me. So after the train sets off and it trundles down rails set in the middle of the road through town, and then heads off across the sand and across the border. And I managed to get a snap of the highly fortified and secure border crossing point. The other border crossing that was notable for us was the one from Chile into Argentina across the Andes. And so we took a modern bus from Santiago to Mendoza. And I was sort of following the route on my phone. And I saw that the road looked like this. And I thought, well, it's probably a good idea to have a look out the window and see what you can see and see if it looks anything like that. And sure enough, it did. And I guess shouldn't really be any surprise that the road actually looks like the map on your phone, but you don't normally see it laid out quite like that. We visited some lakes, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Pacific coast. So one way or another, we came across quite a lot of boats. They were a fairly consistent source of color for us. Here in Bacalar, then I liked the leading lines of the jetty and the way that the boats fit in there. I'm clearly very happy to have 3 boats, so an odd number of boats in the picture. And I thought that worked quite well as for composition as well as for color. Here, I wanted to set the yellow of the little boat against the blue of the lake and the volcano in the background. I'm not sure I'd like to be out on the lake in that boat, but nevertheless really liked how the splash of yellow made the picture for me. Of course, in fishing town, there's always fishing boats, and certainly in the Americas, always brightly colored. And so lots of opportunities there, quite like these two, though again, in the category of wouldn't want to go to sea in this one in the foreground. Also, if you look in the background, you'll see the mountains, and the strip of land between the coast and the mountains is really quite narrow and is constraining for the town. So it just gives you a bit of a sense as to the Andes being present and being a factor everywhere in Chile. In harbours, then often the challenge with boats is finding a composition that works and finding some separation between the boats so that you can take a picture that's in some way structured and meaningful. So I was really happy to find these two boats with a bit of space in front of them and nice colours in the boat that are then picked up in the water. So perhaps of all the boat pictures I got, then I'm most happy with this one. When the boats are out of the water, it's quite a lot easier to walk around and find a composition that works. So I like the repeating lines in this. I do wish, though, that the boats had been switched around and that Emmanuel was the boat on the left-hand side, because I think there's more opportunities with the various colours in Emmanuel than the other boats that are there. But still, you get what you're given, and at least it has a nice warm light on these boats. So Caye Caulker is an island off the coast of Belize, and being an island, then the way on and off the island is via ferry. So you have to get up to be on the ferry when the ferry's leaving. And if that's an early morning trip, then set the alarm early again. Here, the consolation for me was that, so this is sunrise, we're about to get on this ferry, and the wonderful clouds in the sky just really make this, add drama to this picture for me, and particularly as the soft light of sunrise in there. So again, a picture that I like quite a lot. Sometimes our transport was literally very laid back. Here I've been cave tubing, so we walked up the course of a river, beside the banks of the river, and then got into our lorry inner tubes and floated back downstream on the river as it took us through a series of caves where the water has gone through the nearby hills. Hence the hard hats and the helmet lights in there. And so very relaxing, just drifting down. The water was nice and warm, the air was warm, and a happy way to spend a half an hour drifting down. Whilst I was doing this cave tubing, Janet was off visiting this iguana farm and managed to catch this, which I think we've also submitted in one of the challenges. So wanted to do a bit on wildlife, but of all of the sections of this presentation, then this is the shortest, as we really weren't geared up for wildlife photography. So we were traveling with backpacks and on public transport, so there's definitely a limit to the amount of camera gear that we could bring with us. And also we didn't have the time to devote specifically to a wildlife viewing and photography. So it's really a case of grabbing whatever opportunities came up, hence with the iguana. Most of the coastal towns, as I've shown in Chile, had a fishing fleet, and where there's a fishing fleet, there's usually a fish market, and where there's a fish market, then there seemed to be pelicans waiting for some of the clean fish or some tidbits to be thrown to them. Here on the left, I was happy that this chap was just sunning himself and posing as the sun was going down, so some nice light on him and bringing out the texture in his feathers and a bit of a color in his beak. Apologies for the title, for the picture, the bird on the right. It won't mean anything to anyone who wasn't brought up in or wasn't in the UK, I guess, but there we go. Birds of prey are normally pretty skittish, but this one was just walking around one of the sightseeing viewpoints in or near Bariloche, and so I had to take a picture of him and just bring him along. On our round the world trip, we'd come across the turtles just off the beach in Acamal in the Yucatan. And we had an opportunity to go see them again, which we really couldn't resist. So very happy to get this photographed and see that they were still there. But we were struck how much busier it was in the 4 years since our previous visit, and how many more people were out in the water, and how they broadly ignored the instructions to leave the turtles alone. So it was very happy to see the turtles, but definitely mixed feelings about how sustainable and how happy the turtles were that everyone was around. This time we're off the off Cape Corca in Belize, and we've gone out to a marine reserve that's just offshore of Cape Corca. I hadn't meant to get this close to the turtle, but when he comes swimming at you, then he's a lot more agile than I am. So it turns out that in the marine reserve, there is no fishing. And hence the fish are unafraid, and also, as you can see in the background, then there are an awful lot of fish swimming around in some fairly shallow water. However, outside of the marine reserve, there is fishing, and the local speciality is the flesh, the animal that lives inside conch shells. And once these have been caught, the animal needs to be removed from the shell and cleaned. And this tends to be done within the marine reserve, where the guts and the shells get thrown overboard, which is another reason why all the fish are here. And so it wasn't just the turtles, but there was this stingray swimming by, but also you can see the conch shells littering the seabed here. And again, it was saying, well, are these fish all becoming dependent upon human activity, as well as, well, how sustainable is all this conch shell fishing? This is a bit of a happier tale. So this chap's a tarpon that I'd never heard of before, but they are very fast swimmers and very aggressive. And they will leap out of the water to grab small bait fish that are being held above the water level. And that's what's happening here. We also have a slow motion video of one doing this, and the way it can open its jaws is just incredible. But I don't think the video will come across over Zoom, so maybe some other time we'll get that. But you get the idea from this picture, and you get the idea of fast shutter speeds as well. Couldn't resist the opportunity to go back to the Atacama and to have these wonderful flamingos, and reminding me of the flamingos down in Cabo de Gata, which will be definitely something we'll be visiting when we can get back to Spain. There's always the dash of color that they add. So the farmed animals in the Andes are often some mix of vicuñas, guanacos, alpacas, and llamas. Those are the animals that you'll most often see. if you had one of each standing in front of you, you would be able to see the difference between them. But when you just see one at a time, they're quite confusing. And I think it's the national sport of tourist guides is to confuse people as to which is which. We were told that these were vicunias, but from my little bit of internet research, I think that they're guanacos. And similarly, we were told that these chaps were guanacos, but that they're vicunias. Anyway, they're quite cute. They are all farmed rather than wild. And actually, so I think both vicunias and guanacos are on the endangered species list, so not necessarily thriving. These chaps are alpacas. They have a sort of slightly rounded, more rounded faces than llamas, and I think that that makes them really quite cute and endearing. And you can see on the one in front, there's a red tag to show the symbolizing the farmer that owns this chap. So of course, there's plenty of color in the towns and cities too. We just before this presentation, we just had a bit of discussion on street art, and yeah, absolutely, don't go around taking pictures of other people's art. Sometimes though, you just can't resist it, and that was the case of with this mural here. I just thought it was quite an extraordinary painting. I said we'd come back to Valparaiso and see some more of the street art there. It is famous for its street art. And here we've got a sort of pretty realistic representation of the city as street art. It is a city that's built on a ring of pretty steep hills. There are funicular railways to get up to each of them. It is incredibly worth a visit. But sadly, on the day that we were there, the staff for the funicular railways were on strike, and so they weren't running, and we had to do quite a bit of walking around the city, but very rewarding. And so this is my favorite picture of street art in Valparaiso, and I just need to leave it up here for a minute while you look at it and just take in the sheer scale and size of this painting. And then once you work out it's on the side of buildings, you start to think about, well, why is it clearly two halves of the same picture, but they've been painted in the wrong way around? And how did they manage to get all that consistency over such a large scale? So I just thought that this was fabulous. Jumping back up to Mexico, then Guanajuato is another city that's famous for its street art and for the color of the buildings in the city. And so just, yeah, loved just walking around and seeing all of the colors there, so much life. If I recall correctly, and the street art on the left, I think it's a continuous mural that tells the story of the history of the city, or something like that. I have this recollection that it's along those lines. I think I've shown this picture before in one of the monthly challenges, but as I like it and it's my presentation, then no apologies for showing it again. I like the colors, and I like the lines formed by the stairs. And I think that makes for a good composition, as well as for some interesting colors. I've previously confessed to being a bit of a walls and doors kind of photographer, and there were just so many opportunities in the various towns and cities that we walked around. Here, I just love the contrasting colors, the fading paint, and the texture in this wall. So, however, you'd be happy to hear I've kept it down to just 2 pictures of walls. So that one and this one in Antigua de Guatemala, where here it's just blues and greens, so much texture, the fading, the fading glory of this city. I just, yeah, just appealed to me. So there has been discussion about sets around the club, and so I thought this is an opportunity for me to include a set here as a single slide. So here my theme is door handles, 4 different styles of door handles. What appeals to me again is A, the blast of color, and B, the different textures in the wood and the metal that's shown around here. This was a picture that was in the Through the Window challenge. But again, no apologies for showing it again. I just like the colors, and I like how your eye is guided through the frame of the window to the pots, into the kitchen, and then out to the back door with the green painted wall and the plant that's there. Here I've got the water to thank for making this picture for me. Without the reflection in the water, then the buildings would be fairly nondescript. I'm not sure what my composition would be, but with it, the reflections in the water really helped give that blast of color that I was looking for in this picture. Similarly here, then the reflection helps make this picture, though as I look further into it, then you can see with the yellow and orange of the walls and the blue and orange of the gateposts, there's probably quite a lot of scope for other shots and other photos to be taken there. So another missed opportunity, and another reason we'll just have to go back and try again. So here, then I wanted to show how colors can help with the picture, because this first picture is really just a holiday snap. It's just a record of, there was a building, a tower, clock tower, with a bit of a path and some lined by a fountain leading up to it. But at night, it's so much more dramatic, and the colors have really come out. With the fountains not running, then I'm able to get the reflection in the pools on either side of it. And so that's what's helped me to get a much more pleasing picture. Even beautiful buildings like this one are enhanced by great light. So my challenge here was to get the right balance between the light in the sky and the light on the building. I've maybe left it a little bit too late, but nevertheless, there's quite an eerie feel, I think, about this picture, and very much like the colors in it. And again, in daytime, this would be a very holiday snap record of the presidential palace at Lima. What entirely saves it and makes it in any way interesting is the lighting at night. I don't really know why they lit it up red. It might just be reflecting the red of the Peruvian flag, but it's clearly what made this picture for me. And with cityscapes, then, so a lot of the cities towns were quite small, and so Santiago was our first opportunity to see some skyscrapers after Mexico. So I had to take the opportunity to get a cityscape at dusk. I've definitely taken better cityscapes in the past, but what they've lacked that this one has is that glimpse of the Andes. peeping out in the background. So I just love getting that glimpse of mountains and the reminder that they're always there in Chile. So heading inside now, so there's a lot I've left out of this presentation I could have talked about, and one of the big topics I've really omitted entirely is history. And some of the countries have a very, very fascinating history, and I'd love to talk with some of the Spanish guys around their feelings around the independence from Spain and how that all happened, and compare notes with what happened around countries that became independent of Britain. But I wanted to talk about one in particular, and this is the most famous, the most revered person, or most revered historical figure in Argentina, and it's not Eva Perón, but it's General Jose de San Martin, who's known as El Libertador, and he has a complicated history in himself, in that he got booted out of Argentina after leading the independence movement, and he ended up dying in Paris, or France at any rate, before being moved back here some years later. So he's under ceremonial guard in the cathedral in Buenos Aires. It's colourful enough as it is, but actually I wanted to do that as an introduction to one of the many, many monuments that is in every town and city in Argentina for San Martin. Here, the sunset has helped me, and the lighting at sunset. And I like that, like the colours in the sky, and the positioning of the general on his horse against the buildings. So I'm considering this, Frank, as we're sort of thinking about the entries for next month's challenge. So we're on the home run now, and as we started the presentation with cemeteries and then churches, I felt it was appropriate to come back and to end with churches, and churches from the cities. Whereas in the desert, the churches were very simple in their architecture. That's definitely not the case in many cases with churches and cathedrals in the city. Sometimes, as in here, it's incredibly elaborate architecture. Again, that's enhanced by the early morning sunshine. Again, from the terrace, the breakfast terrace of our hotel. For this church, I really wanted to include it, as the color scheme for this church just reminded me so much of the colors that you see all the time in Andalusia, and it sort of made me a little bit homesick. So definitely had to include this one. Sometimes the color scheme was just a lot more striking. And the very vivid colors here that they'd managed to maintain right through to the inside, and so keeping the color scheme going inside of the church too. Sometimes it's just the scale and the size of the cathedral that's impressive. So yeah, a bit of a holiday snap, but just look at the architecture and look at the detail above the doorway. One of the surprises for me was that it wasn't always what I considered to be a Hispanic or a Catholic church architecture. I'm by no means an expert, but I would consider these churches here, both from Elqui Valley, so 3/4 of the way up Chile, and then Bariloche, which is much further south, so 1/4 of the way up South America. So a big difference in big distance between these two places, but similar architectural styles. I'd consider it to be Germanic. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't really know, but it is a reminder that there were waves of German immigration into South America. Sometimes all that was left is the ruins. So this is the cathedral in Antigua de Guatemala. It must have been incredibly spectacular when it was intact, but it's been destroyed not just by one earthquake, but by several, and it's too hard and the country's too poor to restore it. And so all that's left is for you to walk around the ruins of the cathedral and think about what might have been and what it must have looked like in its prime. Here in, so the town is formerly Quetzaltenango, but everyone just calls it Xela for reasons that are pretty obvious, really. All that's left of the cathedral here is the facade that's been propped up from behind. And if you look on the left-hand picture through the window above the door, then you can see just some structural work propping it up, and with daylight in the background. The new cathedral is built immediately behind this facade, and what a color scheme inside this cathedral, just astonishing and quite unique in my experience. And of course, it's the interior of the cathedrals that often it's just the most colorful and the most spectacular architecture, and with the intricacy of the artwork in a lot of places too. Just spectacular. Just love, you know, the colors and the richness of the artwork that's in here. And just try not to think about where all the gold that's in this cathedral came from. But generally in photography, there's a rule: look behind you when you're taking your photos. In churches and cathedrals, the rule is look up. And I took quite a little bit of time to position myself just right under the dome of the cathedral in Morelia, and to get all my verticals lined up and to get it all symmetrical. I'm very pleased with the outcome here. But yeah, definitely quite a bit of work to get it just right. Even a little bit out is quite noticeable. And sometimes then you have the nighttime illumination that really sets off the architecture. So very much like this, the cathedral in Puebla, it's pretty dramatic even in the daytime. But with the colors they've chosen to illuminate the towers in particular, then really dramatic coloring. And here we have the cathedral from the front. Two pictures not quite properly stitched together. Need to work on my combining panoramas. And so I think it's appropriate to end here with a photo that was taken at the end of the day. It's a photo that was taken in Bariloche, which was pretty much our last stop before flying home, and a photo that I'm just very happy with. It's another example of a picture that's made by the light that it was taken in. So I've been wandering around Bariloche in the day. I'd taken a couple of pictures of this wireframe statue, and at daytime it's pretty nondescript. It's like, okay, so yeah, it's there. It's a record of what's there. But for me, then it's made. This picture is made by the sunset colors. I like the way that there's a wisp of cloud in the sky, and the figures seem to be looking at that wisp of cloud, and how I've managed to get the entire statue positioned above the skyline and in the sky, so keeping it clear of the lake. So I think that's a pretty nice picture to end this session with. I've probably taken up enough time. I'm sure I've taken up enough of folks' time. There is a lot more I could have shared around the history of the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayas, independence movements. We could have talked about food and drink, but enough I think. I don't know about you guys, but it's sharpened my desire to get traveling again. Can't wait until we get out of this ridiculous COVID situation. Are there any questions? Let me hand over to questions.
Yes, one question, Dave.
Yes.
Did you use an underwater camera for the turtle photograph? And
I had an underwater case for my, so the underwater photos were taken with a Sony RX100 compact camera. And I spent about as much on the underwater case for the camera as I did on the camera itself. And so it's a properly waterproof down to diving depths. And it has levers and knobs that allow access to all of the controls of the camera from outside of the case. And that's what I used.
that's great. Very good.
Dave, I'd just like to say thank you very much for that very interesting travelogue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I hope it was okay.
Thanks, Dave.